歡迎大家收聽又一集嘅 For Example 啦。咁我哋今日咧錄製嘅日子就係4月27號2026年。咁今日咧我哋好開心就請咗張靜雪喺度咧就做我哋嘅嘉賓嘅。咁就少少 background 啦。咁靜雪就係我喺 University of Kentucky 度嘅 graduate student 啦。咁佢就啱啱咧就 defend 咗佢嘅 dissertation， 所以而家咧佢就係一個博士啦。咁樣恭喜晒靜雪。咁佢嘅讀嘅科目咧就係 Gender and Women Studies 啦。咁佢嗰個dissertation 嘅 research 就係關於呢個陪讀媽媽嘅phenomenon 啦。咁佢就喺泰國清邁同埋 Los Angeles LA 嘅地方咧，就係做咗好多訪問嘅。咁所以我哋今個呢一集咧，就係大部分都會係用英文去講解啦。咁但係有時可能靜雪係會用翻少少普通話啦，去表達翻有一啲英文 capture 唔到嘅意思嘅。好啦，靜雪係。Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I could actually understand a little bit Cantonese. I was trying to follow, but mostly from the English. Inviting me here, Sharon, and I am super excited and just excited to have the opportunity, this wonderful opportunity to share about a little bit about my research.
Yeah, so for the audiences who have not read your incredible dissertation, can you tell us a little bit of what it is about and what first draw your interest to this phenomenon of陪讀媽媽?
Of course, so my research is about the phenomenon of陪讀媽媽in both Chiang Mai, Thailand, and the United States, Los Angeles area, and I specifically focus on what is so my dissertation mostly specifically focused on how Chinese mainstream state media narrative is about this group of women. And so I found out that they use a very nationalist discourse to package their decision to actually move abroad for their children's education, framing it as a journey that is like to 西游记, which is they travel to a different country to gain all the resources and eventually come back, right? And I also found out that COVID is specifically a very important not pushing factor, but like sort of the pushing factor of these women. They sort of sense that COVID is a rupturing point, that their ordinary middle class life cannot be sustained anymore. And I also did a little bit of research about the comparative parameter between Thailand and the United States. Thailand as a livable pause that is away from the PRC, and the United States as the ultimate destination, but also has this more complicated legal and language regimes that are sort of prohibiting themselves from flourishing. And this is sort of the general arc of my dissertation. And the reason why I was interested in this topic is because of it's kind of I do want to be honest with you. So it was sort of a decision that I had to make at that point of my prospectus defense, because my proposal was actually, when I first applied for the PhD, I was anticipating to do some field work inside China that is more directly related to my master thesis, which is about the Chinese state's current pronatalist policies, right? But then COVID started. So I entered the program in 2020, and then COVID started. And then China has this massive zero COVID lockdown measurement that I felt like I may not be able to go back to China to do field research, or it was not expectable at all, because the policies were changing on a daily basis and stuff. So I was thinking, now I need to do some diaspora research so that I do not need to go back to China again. And then I was sort of desperately scrolling social media for some inspirations, right? Because I was also in lockdown, right? And so I came across, and I was on Rednote, 小红书. So I was scrolling on Rednote, and somehow it started to send me, like, algorithm decided to send me post of 陪读妈妈. I still do not know why. Maybe it's just sort of, I don't know. But then I did some research. I think it is actually connects really well to my former research about reproduction, about social reproduction. And I also did some work on motherhood studies and so it all speaks really well. And I am particularly interested in how Chinese state sort of is intervening in this phenomena. And that is how I structured my dissertation. Hopefully it is not too long.
Oh, yeah, that is so interesting because a lot of migration studies or diaspora studies research, we have a lot of focuses on international students, but not the parents, especially the mother who are going. So I am kind of curious, when you're doing your research, are there anything that you find that was very surprising that you think that, current research or people studying migration haven't really thought about?
Oh, yes, totally. It is really famous actors like Mei Ting, Wu Junmei, like really famous actors. And so actresses. So I was like, okay, it is a term that is a social identity, sort of is stable and stuff. But when I entered this fieldwork, I was astonished by how these women felt that label is a really heavily stigmatized one. So sort of I have this question saying that I will speak in Mandarin right now because that's how I asked them in my interview. So I asked 你是怎么决定要出来陪读的？或者说 or 你是怎么决定做出这个陪读的决定的？ So I framed in my understanding in a really neutral way. So I asked how basically I tried to be as neutral as possible, sort of to say, how did you make the decision of accompanying your children to study abroad? And when I asked this question, they were really sort of defensive. I talked to Sharon, you read my dissertation, so you know I read a whole chapter about it. So they were really defensive about it. They would say stuff like, now I will switch into Mandarin. They will say stuff like, 陪读没有什么不好的。我觉得陪读很好啊。I was not mentioning 陪读 as a good or bad thing at all. The only thing I asked is how you make the decision. It's not even why, it's how you make the decision. And they would felt it was an attack on their personal identity or their choice of sort of let go of their career at a certain point. They would felt that it is such an ambivalent social stigma, even as if there's social stigma around the stay-home mother. In one particular interview, I remember it really clearly, that woman even I felt bad to say this, but somehow it felt like a therapeutic session for that woman. So she almost always asked me to validate her decision, saying it's not too bad, right? It's not that bad. It cannot be that bad. And I was like, yes. And I cited Maria Mee's the social reproduction theory to sort of validate her, saying that, yeah, because it is because your social reproduction work in home that your husband is able to work outside. So I sort of had to validate her. And she asked me, what is your opinion about my being a陪读 mama? I don't have an opinion. I'm asking you, what is your thought about this process? And I think this is the most surprising part for me, that they have this really heavy stigma around it. But another interesting thing is no one actually, including my interlocutors, they never say anything specific about, oh, there is这里有一个对我们陪读妈妈有一个污名化的东西。They never explicitly say what that stigma is. It almost is so ambivalent in the society, but it is overall so generally existing in the society that they have constantly to negotiate this label. And another surprising thing for me is actually COVID. Yes, I said that earlier, that I designed this during COVID, but I was not anticipating that my interlocutors will share really frankly about their negative opinions about COVID, because we all know like China is a really strict state in terms of ideology control and and freedom of speech. So I was like, and most of it, not most, the majority part that I did interview was online. It's 50-50 or 60-50. So I was not anticipating that they will be like, oh, I can be honest, I can trust this woman, they can trust me. But as a matter of fact, they were being super political in my interview, which is really surprising. They were saying that they lost 人权, human rights because of the COVID lockdown, and they were saying that the lockdown and Xi's regime is reminding them as cultural revolution, and they were concerned that their children will be growing up in an era that is reminiscent of cultural revolution. And they said it was a huge reason why they want to basically extract their children away from the toxic 有毒的土地，一滩污水 dirty word, dirty mud, from the dirty mud of PRC. They say, if you do not want to be contaminated by the dirty water, then the best way you can do it is to leave the dirty water. 如果你不想要你的孩子被污染，那你最快的方法就是把你孩子给带出来。It's sort of framed in that way. And COVID is not only because of the ideology control, but also I think another thing that emerged in my dissertation field work is that they think COVID is basically a signal to let them know that their ordinary middle class life can be suspended and seized at any time. It gives them the signal that, oh, the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, they don't really care about anything. They can say, right now you are going to do COVID PCR test every day. You are going to go downstairs, do the test every day, no matter what, right? And one woman actually said one thing, their door was knocked at the middle of the night and grabbed them down to do a PCR test. It was in Guangxi province, and they were like, the woman told me that was the moment she realized she could not stay in China anymore, because there is literally no limit of the state power that can be so much intrusive to the ordinary people's life. They gave an example that they said, I will speak Mandarin. 他们告诉我，你现在把嘴张开，我要做测试了。我现在就要把嘴张开。You open the mouth. You say you open the mouth. I will be open the mouth. It sounds to me almost like a rape metaphor. Like you are so intrusively controlled and even raped by the authority. Like, because it is so visceral, the metaphor is so visceral. 你把嘴张开，我们现在要做测试了。And that moment really struck me because it's such a vivid and visceral example to say how the extent to which the state can be just dominate your most intimate life, your body gesture, your physical movement. It's just such a vivid moment to me. Yes, I think that are the two biggest surprise that I have during my field work.
Yeah, thank you, Jingshu. I think that's a lot to unpack there, and it's all very interesting. And I want to go back to the COVID point later, but I want to first ask a bit more about the first part of what you said about the stigma. And I think for our non-Chinese audience, especially since we're recording this in English, it may be useful to fill out the background for them and for us a bit more too, since some people may not even have heard the term "陪读妈妈." And I think for a lot of obvious reasons, obviously I don't get that in my social media. So I guess one question I have, actually two questions I have for you is one, just like how did the term, like a very basic one really, how did the term come about? Like when I think of陪读, and I think this may be where the stigma came from. I think of, in Chinese history, you have like 书童, you have like these like little servants who help to like, make the ink and whatnot. Like they're the ones who like, accompany the master to study. And I was wondering if陪读has that like master-servant relationship implied in it, and that's where the stigma comes from. But I was wondering, like, when did the term gain popularity? And I know you started seeing that in social media. Is it like a term that was created by these like mothers as a self-understanding strategy, or was it like imposed on them by these TV shows or drama, or how did the term like arise? I think that's like one question I have, and then two, maybe you can just say a bit more to the broader phenomenon. Like we always like in lots of like societies, like in the 20th century at least, like or even before, you have stay-at-home mother isn't exactly an oddity. But obviously it seems like we're looking at more middle class or even higher middle class mothers here. And this is where I think that's where the tension comes out, right? Because in other East Asian societies, in Hong Kong, in South Korea, or even like in a lot of Chinese cities, right? You're seeing like a lot more women in the middle class and high middle class like coming out as like people who work. And you have a lot of families where both parents now work, but now you have these like not stay at home mothers, but like these陪读妈妈, I guess, who are like bucking the trend, sort of. So I guess one other question I have is just like to the broader social phenomenon, like when did it start, or do you have like speculation as to, well, not speculation, obviously you've interviewed these people, how and why these folks decide, or how did these families decide that the mother should follow the son and daughter to either Thailand or US to accompany them, like what, I guess just like I want to understand like where the term came about, and how did it come about, and then a bit on also how did the phenomenon come about, how did these like families make their decisions.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for your question, Samuel. So I will start by one by one. The first, like, how does the term arrive? I think it is in Mandarin, in the PRC culture. There is the earliest thing that I can remember that is related to the Peidu Mama phenomenon is actually the mother of Mencius, 孟母三迁, the mothers of Mencius moved 3 times for the education of Mencius, right? So this is how I frame it as the earliest moment of my of the phenomenon that I am trying to intervene, like because the story is literally like Mencius' mother moved 3 times, because the first time it was near I think a graveyard, a second time they were lived to a market, and the mother decided, oh, these 2 places are not good for my son's education. Then she eventually moved next to a school. It's like a school district, and so she eventually thought, oh, it is a great chance, a great place for my son's education. And so in this story, I think what is latent in this story is like almost like the mother's wisdom is the needed reason why Mencius could become such a great philosopher at a later stage. So the mother is responsible for children's education. I think this has a really long cultural heritage that I don't think is only in China, but also in South Korea and in Singapore and perhaps also in Hong Kong. Like mothers are oftentimes more deemed as more directly responsible for children's education. This is, I think, the cultural heritage. And another thing is Peidu Mama is not a thing that only happens in a transnational context. It actually is it is also really prevalent. I'm not going to say it's more prevalent or less prevalent, but it's also really prevalent in rural to urban school migration, because China have this 户口 system, right? So if you have a rural 户口, then it means that your education, the quality of your education is relatively not that as advantaged as in the urban area. So many women actually accompany their children to study in urban area. and rural women accompany their women to their children to study in urban area, and this is what this has also been studied quite extensively by a lot of not only migration scholars but also education scholars in the context of China. Like, what does it mean to say the Gaokao system in China, and what it does say about uneven distribution of educational system in China, stuff like that. So 陪读妈妈 is a really socially visible label in China, and it does not only apply to the transnational context but also the domestic context as well. This is sort of my the first part of my question of the question. And another thing, I think your Samuel, the 书童 and the 主人, the master and servant thing, the metaphor, the perspective is interesting. And I actually heard a similar version of my fieldwork research. The one woman specifically, that woman is from the most, in her own word, 最有名的电视台. I'm not going to make any speculation or make any judgment, but that is in her own word. And she is now currently in the United States, right? So she said, but her 小红书 account title is similar. It's not the actual version. It's not the actual title. I translated it 陪读妈妈在加州. It's not exact words. You cannot find it. Okay, it's just my but it has her 小红书 account handle has 陪读妈妈 the 4 words inside of it. But in the interview, she actually said she actually dislikes this label. And the reason why she still used this label is that she wanted to say whether it is actually profitable in the sense of, okay, maybe other women will ask me for consultant, maybe other women will ask me for advice, maybe I can be a self-branding. But deep down, she said she disliked this title because it makes as if she is the accessory of her children. Because 陪读妈妈 is like, 陪读 is almost an adjective qualifying before the term mother, right? So another mom that really remember that interview really well, that she differentiated between 陪读妈妈 as a label and the verb of 我现在在陪读. I am doing 陪读 right now. She said, I am not a 陪读妈，我不是一个陪读妈妈，我是一个妈妈，然后我现在在陪读. I think it is a really interesting linguistic distinction because a verb contains temporality, and a verb is a verb with an agency. You have this agency, right? And you are doing this particular verb of 陪读, and you are all doing a lot of other things as well. But 陪读妈妈 is almost like, everything you do is just accompanying your children to study. I think that is probably why they feel the need to make justification, or they felt that their identity or agency are diminished a little, not a little bit, to a large extent, is because it's almost a totalizing description of their life, and they want to resist against it. I think that's all the answers I have for your question. If you think any aspect are not addressed, please give me a follow-up question. Thank you. Okay.
No worries, Xinxie, and thank you so much for you talk a lot of very, very interesting stuff, and you can treat this as like a conversation. You can also ask us questions or ask us if we have similar observations. So when I was reading your dissertation, I found well, definitely what you just mentioned is like fascinating. And you also mentioned something that our listener might have heard of already before, which is I think is in the very same chapter you just mentioned about Sarah Ahmed on how the emotions is actually a part of the things that both people feels, and at the same time they are being managed, and the state also has their own narrative about how these陪读 mama, like how patriotic they are, how morally righteous they are to be able to accompany their children to go out and study and come back later. So I think the one thing that you just pointed out as fascinating, which a lot of migration scholars are interested in, and I believe a lot of listeners are also very interested in, which is about temporality, about imagining futures. Like, well, how would this label, like when you talk about it is actually a verb, then that means it's a process. It's just a temporal state for them to. It's an act, right? And at the same time, the state seems to portray it as more like an essential characteristics or features of a good陪读 mama, a good mama accompanying their children to go to the overseas and come back later. I do wonder, how do you see when you listen to these stories, listen to these people talking about, can you share a little bit more about this kind of like conflicting contradictions happening? And in your term, you said, I think you used ambivalence, right? This kind of ambivalence happening. How do they navigate those kind of state narratives and other people's looking at them? Do they feel like that labels as a stigma because other people would feel like they are patriotic, contributing to the country, or they are seeing them as more like a tool, an instrument? And at the same time, you also mentioned they also try to use the label in a way to see if they can, your exact term you mentioned in the interview is that she still wants to use that on Red Notes,陪读 mama as a label in a way to be instrumental, but at the same time she privately hold it more of a resistant stance to that particular label. Can you tease that kind of contradiction a little bit further to us? Like, how does that actually work? How do they navigate that?
Yes, thank you so much. I think this is the most chaotic chapter in my dissertation. I spent so much time piece these different layers out, because in their narrative they would not say like, oh, I am negotiating this label because I am doing this and this and this. It's all really in flux. It's very like I had to tease out the controversies and contradictions in their narrative, which is quite a challenge for me. I revised it for like at least 5 times for this chapter. So, but like I think so first of all, like I think the one of the most strategies I think they are trying to do is they try to reframe this role. Reframe in the way of they sense something is wrong, but they don't explicitly say that, but they try to reframe it. And the first strategy I now can remember, because I cannot remember everything I wrote in dissertation already. It's been a week since I defended. I already forgot 80% of it. But I will remember it later. But anyway, the first thing that I can remember is sort of they are trying to embrace this label with mediation. First, for example, they would say, like, I think the example I said very earlier, that I asked what is your perception of this label, and they start saying like I'm going to say in Mandarin, 我觉得这是很中性的，我不觉得这是有褒义或者有贬义，我觉得这个就是挺好的。当然我也很享受，然后我也不觉得我也不觉得这个事情有什么不好的，我觉得这是 OK 的。See how, but remember what is my question? Remember what is my question again? What is your thought about this label? I never said anything is wrong. I never said, is there anything wrong with this label? Is it not okay? But they were offering me such a, like, because in the actual interview, the feelings would be more intense, right? So I felt like almost it was really tensed. I almost thought she was thinking I was attacking her. So I had to intervene. At that moment, I realized I had to intervene. I was like, oh, 没有，我就是问一下，我没有觉得这个好或者不好。 I'm just asking. I don't think it's wrong or bad. I'm just asking. So I had to really justify myself against their justification again, right? And when she heard of this, my clarification, then she started saying, "Oh, okay, 我觉得这挺好的，我觉得这其实是一个好事。如果任何一个人告诉我她是一个陪读妈妈，我会觉得我非常的崇敬她，我会觉得这个人很伟大，我会觉得这个人很厉害。And I want to pointing out that there is a change of footing here. Like she said, 如果有别人告诉我她是一个陪读妈妈 if someone tells me she is a 陪读妈妈 I will say she's really admirable. She's not saying I am a 陪读妈妈 I think I am admirable. I think I'm really great. I think this footing change is really fascinating to me because she felt it is somehow difficult for her to embrace this label as a person, but she can sort of embrace it in a mediated format that she can say someone else is great. Because in a third person perspective, it may gives her certain level of power and certain level of agency that she is actively evaluating others instead of being putting into a label or a social identity that may subject to others' evaluation. I think the change of footing is really interesting for me here. And another strategy that I mentioned earlier is just the temporality thing, the change of the it's a verb instead of is essential identity of mine. And another thing I think is really, really interesting is the comparison. Their the comparison between themselves and their husband. They would say negative things to me about their husband because I asked, 为什么决定是你出来? Why did you decide it's that? Because the question I asked is because they have two parents. There are two parents. For some women, they were divorced. I don't ask this question, right? Because I want to be neutral. I want to have the assumption that both men and women can do the educational accompanying work or labor, but they somehow again interpreted it in a way that is not what I meant. They thought, why you are doing the traditional gendered labor work? They would say things like, because I said, 为什么你决定出来? They were like, because my husband is incompetent. 因为他没有能力，因为他不想出来。And they would frame transnational migration as a intensive labor that their husband cannot, has no ability to do. Like either because of their lack of extrovert personality, or the lack of management ability, because they acknowledge that it is intensive labor, that there is a lot of management work involved. They had to manage their children's education. They had to manage the bills. They had to manage where to find the rented house or apartment. They have a lot of things to manage, and they would claim their husband do not have this capability. And they will also say that one woman even said her husband is a 妈宝男, mama's boy, and say that basically has no ability to handle things as an adult, or sometimes will be more neutral evaluation, like, my English is better. So they would claim it as an intensive labor as contrast to their husband's incompetence, because I think this is against of the assumption that or the stigma that 陪读妈妈 is actually dependent on their husband's financial income. And they were twisting it as they were changing the perspective. It's not that they are dependent on their husband's money. As a matter of fact, they're way better than their husband. that they can manage all those things that their husband cannot manage. Because one woman said that her friends told her that 你现在在享福啊。You're enjoying your life right now, and as if, oh, you're just living off on your husband's money and stuff. So they were like, so that woman told me, oh, they do not know how much labor I am doing on a daily basis, blah, 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 a lot of things they are doing. And I think there is another layer of stigma or the ambivalent discrimination that they're experiencing on a daily basis that they had to sort of combat. That's my I think that's my teasing out part. I hope it sort of answers your question.
Yeah, so Jingshe, that is so fascinating, that part, because I think what was interesting or what you're kind of talking about was like on the one hand, the being a陪读 mama allowed these women to challenge a patriarchal gendered form of labor and of, self-representation. But on the other hand, they also have internalized the stigma that to put their children first means that they are now somehow betraying a form of, a feminist, empowered women, right? And so it's kind of like simultaneously feeling empowered and also feeling like they're not doing a good job at that. Can you talk a little bit more about how in your interviews, how this is showing up and how they're navigating or talking about their relationships with family, with home, or even their relationships with their children now that they're abroad?
Could you clarify your question a little bit? Like what aspect of the interview that you want me to elaborate a little bit?
Yeah,
Sorry.
so there's this contradiction, right, between how they are simultaneously performing as this like strong, empowered women and wife who's stronger than their husband. But on the other hand, because to uphold this strong image makes them feel this internal turmoil that, oh, now that I have put my career aside and now I'm just a full-time stay-at-home parent, stay-at-home mom, that they're not this modern, powerful women anymore. But both of those things are tied to their陪读 mama identity.
Yes.
So how do they resolve these contradictions, or do they just not resolve it and just keep living this way?
Yeah, I think this is such a good observation. I think is exactly because of their performance of a strong-willed woman that makes them seems less progressive, because they're just being strong-willed in terms of being a good full-time stay-home mother, right? I think this is so fascinating. And actually, I think one of the strategy they used is that some of the women would packaging it as they would reclaim the role as it is my desire. It is my desire to migrate to begin with. But because of the patriarchal society in China, the expectation on women, and especially the expectation on the mother, when you have a child, it's almost impossible. You would say, now I am going to migrate abroad without my children, right? It's almost impossible to think that way. You are a mother, you always need to almost prioritize your children, or not even your prioritize. You cannot ditch your kid inside of China when you are migrate, right? And one woman, she said she works in a big head tech company in Hangzhou, Zhejiang province, like the three of the big head company. I'm not going to mention it, but like one of the biggest three head tech company. And she said she thought her career was sort of ending because of the age. She was growing older and stuff, and she wanted to explore another chance for her career. But her parents-in-law, she sensed that her parents-in-law and her own parents would not allow it. So she said, now I am going to take my kids away to study abroad. So she basically used her kids as a bargain chip to negotiate against this patriarchal family and the patriarchal society that does not allow her to have her own desire after she becomes a mother, but also in a way that is socially and morally legible to sort of almost there she's pleasing her parents-in-law and the mother and her own parents, but in a way that her own goal can be finally achieved and everyone's happy. This is one of the most interesting case that I want to bring up, and how I think this is a good example that speaks back to you how they were actually trying to always find a gray zone in between being a less progressive woman on the one hand, but also being able to achieve their dream or their desire to a certain extent. I think the fascinating part of these women is that they know that they are living in a gray zone morally or like ethically, like, oh, you're not that progressive anymore, you are a stay-at-home mother, because especially in socialist China that there is a huge slogan of women holds up half the sky. And it's almost from that revolution area that women are supposed to do the double shift. You should be a caring mother. You should be a filial daughter-in-law. You should be a good wife. But you also need to hold up half the sky, right? You also need to hold up half the sky. And now they're not holding up the half the sky anymore, in the sense of they're not actively have a waged job. So they are also actively negotiating with that layer of stigma, that not socially legibly holding up half the sky in terms of having a wage labor. So it is very layered stigma, I think.
This is so fascinating, and I think you spoke really well to how by geographically, removing themselves, like they were able to play this game where they could navigate these like I think complicated gender dynamics in China. And now I'm wondering if we can also shift to talking about the dynamics once they are outside China. And I was wondering, well, a few questions here. I think the most basic question is, I was just wondering, among the陪读妈妈that you've looked at, what cities in the US were they primarily in? Where your kind of like cases, if you will. And then I'm asking this because I'm interested in the communities that they then become a part of. Like I was thinking about, let's say, the Bay Area, because you mentioned something that one of them was maybe in San Francisco, and obviously it's a very like, you can say, multicultural, multiracial community, which has both a progressive dimension to it, and then there are also a strong conservative bent in parts of the community as well. And I know you wrote about, both race and church in the dissertation, and then I was also like wondering about like whether there was like a tightly knitted or tight community of陪讀媽媽themselves, and then how they interact with the broader geographical community there, be it the broader Chinese diaspora or be it with other folks. And then I'm also wondering if you mentioned a lot earlier on in the beginning about this metaphor of COG. And I was thinking part of it makes a lot of sense, but it doesn't make too much sense to me. But like for those of you who don't know the story, you have this monk who's trying to get the authentic scriptures in India to bring it back to China for translation. And then you have all these like folks like the Monkey King who are helping him. But I think another part of the story is they have to face all these different demons and monsters who try to stop them on the way. And I was wondering what part of the story come into play with that metaphor. Like who are the demons? Who are the monsters there? Who want to eat the child, or who want to eat the monk? I was actually wondering, is the mother the monk, or is the mother the monkey king, or who's what like who exactly is the陪讀媽媽in this story? But yeah, I was just wondering if how does that story COG? I just thought that was fascinating, like come into play, and then if you can use that as a segue into talking a bit about the community that they are in, or the dynamics that they find themselves in the US. We can talk about Thailand later on, but I thought US is a context that's more familiar to some of us, so maybe start with the US.
Okay, thank you for the question about the 西游记 part. I think I may want to clarify a little bit. So this 西游记 is not is actually so my first chapter is about a TV series called 陪读妈妈, right? And in the almost last several scenes of that TV series, there was an argument showing up between a woman who has already have a Canada PR card, 枫叶卡 Canada PR card, and a 陪读妈妈. So the woman with a PR card said to her, told her daughter that do not interact with women like her anymore. 不要再和这种人相处了。这种人 means the 陪读妈妈. And so the 陪读妈妈 who is a protagonist that gives a really long nationalist discourse saying that basically saying that what do you mean by people like us? We are all made in China. No matter you have a maple leaf card or not, we both are made in China. And then she brought up the metaphor of 西游记. She said something, we're just like I think in this metaphor, the monkey is the kid, the monkey is the kid, and the mother is the monk, I think, in her, but maybe because they never, I don't think the protagonist specifically expanded who is the monkey or who is the monk and like who is the monster, but the main point of the 西游记 metaphor is like 他们去东土大唐，他们去西天取经. They were from the Great Tang Dynasty. And the Great Tang Dynasty is already a huge metaphor. Like Tang Dynasty is arguably one of the most powerful feudal dynasty in China, right? So, and they were sort of 去西天取经 to learn things from other countries and then go back to the Great Tang Dynasty. And it is a really saying the protagonist is saying that it's a really in a nationalist discourse, saying that they are only just learning some of the different things. They did not even say better things, just different things from different countries. Then we are going back to China and to do this patriotic and nationalist duty of being a good Chinese citizen. I think that is where the metaphor kicks in. And for the dynamics in first of all, the city in the United States was the greater Los Angeles area. Like it contains a lot of different cities like Diamond Bar and Pomona and Walnut, and some women are also in the urban. So the greater Los Angeles area instead of a specific city because of the infrastructure in the United States, people are living a more sporadic way. And but for the dynamics I have been observed, most of the women, they are still most likely to be interacting with other Chinese diaspora communities because of their lack of English language skills, so they can only interact with other Chinese women. And they have, specifically in Thailand, they definitely have this陪读circle, where a lot of 陪读 mama, they were just living in Thailand and they constantly hang out with each other. Not all, but I have to say that not activities are surrounding 陪读. They would just go to a cafe and to hang out, or they would go hiking with other women, with their children, or without their children. But there are also other activities that are strictly related to 陪读. For example, there is an English corner. I'm not sure whether you know this, but English corner is a thing that is really prevalent in mainland China, 叫英语角, where they would just grab one native English speaker and surrounded by a lot of persons who do not speak English, and they would just not attack, but just asking a bunch of questions, practicing English with that one poor native English speaker. But I have to say, there is also a really racial hierarchy here, because in most of the cases, the native English speaker is strictly white person. They do not speak to non-white native English speakers. They do not want to speak to non-white English native speakers for Chinese diaspora study communities. And another thing that speaking of which, I want to bring up again, that I have already talked about a little bit during my defense, is how their racialization language. So in the context of the United States, when they were saying 美国人, Americans, they were strictly referring to white Americans, okay? Because they have different words for Latin American, for Hispanic Americans, or for other black communities and Hispanic communities. They have different wordings, and they were say like, so they for Hispanic communities, the word is 老莫, and for Black communities is even worse. It's just 老黑. It's just really bad. It's not my word, okay? It's just really bad racial, even racist wordings. But so when they were in the interviews, they would sometimes say like, I want my kid to be a 小小美国人. 我想要我的孩子成为一个小小美国人. They were actually saying they want their kid to be only surrounded by white Americans and eventually behave like a white American. And this is how I think this is interesting, how Chinese people are always, when they're imagining the United, it's very complicated, but it's not a new thing, right? When they're imagining the United States, it's always a white country. But at the same time, they would also say that, oh, it is a migrating country, and therefore they, as migrants, are sort of legibly included in the regime of a 移民国家. But except for them, everyone is white. I think this is it's not a new dynamic, but it's also a dynamic that is prevalent in my study, that when they are imagining the United States, is always white, and the rest is just like also migrants. I don't think they understand the nuanced dynamics of different racial groups in the United States, and I don't think they care that much from deep down their heart. I do want to be honest, because I do not want to present my interlocutors as, oh, the victim of patriarchy, or the victim of the nationalist discourse. I do want to not remind, but say it again. They're really rich. They're really privileged. And they are sometimes very ignorant of the racial dynamics in the United States. And to a certain extent, they are very racist. Because in a later chapter, there is one woman saying that, oh, her current school district, 她现在的学区, are filled with Hispanic Americans, filled with 老莫. And immediately, I never got a chance to say anything, okay? And immediately after that statement, she whispered to me. She whispered to me in the sense of, 那边有很多帮派的. There are a lot of gang members. And like, as if in a whispering means, and we were in her house in that interview. And imagining how deeply the racialized stigmatization she is attaching to other racialized communities. Not like, I was like, what about you? You are not, you are also a migrant. Like, what you are doing when you are attaching those racializing labels to other people of color community. But I don't think they consciously realized it. When they say American as United States, they were referring to a white country. But they all realize that, oh, I'm also a migrant. So that is the part when they say, 美国是一个移民国家，对所有人都很好。 So, but they were constantly basically switching the footing that works towards their maximum of their benefit, I think.
This is
That
so
is
fascinating because it's not just this phenomenon is not just among陪讀媽媽, like a lot of Hong Kongers are that way. So actually, yeah, this is something that the three of us are also familiar with. But the question that I want to ask you is like, or maybe this is also an observation. On the one hand, the陪讀mamas are leaving because of the push factor that you talked about earlier on, that they think that, oh, if they were to stay in China, then their kids are going to suffer from a cultural revolution like education. So they are anti a Chinese state nationalism, right? But on the other hand, when they're in the US, they inadvertently are buying into this white American nationalism in a way that's also kind of incongruent because they're also, like you're saying, they're also migrant, and the current administration are not very friendly to migrants or immigrants. So that's like another contradiction that I think you have so beautifully summarized. I don't know if there's a question in here, but I'm just kind of pointing out that the nationalism part is very fascinating for me to think about. So maybe Samuel or Kennedy, if you have a question along those lines, maybe let you ask it.
I think it's beautiful that how you tease out, how people imagine what American is, and at the same time they see it as like a 移民国家, and in that way they think of themselves and those white Americans, and there is a line underneath that they see other people, other immigrants are below, and I think that racial hierarchy really plays out very and again, as just Sharon said, like Samuel and I was living in Los Angeles for quite a few years. Samuel is now in Los Angeles, and we can see people like that all the time, not just mainland Chinese people or陪讀媽媽, but also Hong Kongers, Taiwanese, other people. And I do have a question for you, like that I always ask when I know people are doing qualitative research, is when you see listen to all these kinds of puzzling, awkward, and probably troubling rhetoric, how did you respond? And what was your feeling? And did you feel exhausting when you were analyzing and writing about it? Because I'm now writing Trump supporters, Hong Kong Trump supporters. I can tell you that the past 4 weeks was like super exhausting for me. Partly because I have to tease out all these, but at the same time write them out and tell the readers what it is. And at the same time, there are a lot of contrast. I do want to listen to. What about you? Well, how did you feel?
Yeah, so this is such a good question. I finished my fieldwork in 2024, almost 2024 August, and I could not start writing until half year later, and that is the reason why my dissertation writing process was a little bit delayed, and I could only graduate in 6 years instead of 5 than I anticipated because of the exhaustion Candy you just mentioned. Like because they were really, they have, I'm not going to say good or bad, but they have some frustrating parts happening in my interview. For example, those racializing language, or they are really class privileged language, or I did not have a chance to elaborate, so I'm going to talk a little bit about it right now. But also the gender discrimination. They would say one woman in California, they would express their negative attitude towards transgender community and gay community. They would say it's just the regulations that are endorsed by the California state government is not good. They should not teach any those things. She did not even want to specify what are those things. Just assume that I'm on the same page with them, same page as her. And I think that part is the most exhausting part for me, because you want them to trust you, right? You want them to trust you enough to say things that you want to analyze. But when they were trusting you, it almost comes with the fact that they assume you are part of them. But you're not a part of them. You don't agree with their negative opinions about Black communities, about other migrant communities, about gay communities. So there is a really, really, really contested field. You ask me, how did I respond? I mostly just nod and smile. I mostly just do this. I mostly just do, but occasionally I would ask clarification questions, in the sense I want to drag them back. I would ask them, what do you mean that you don't like this regulation? I don't think there's I think I would say things, but I think this is what you want when you are leaving China, right? So I occasionally ask things like that, the freedom speech and stuff. And those women would be like, but it's too much. And so I think I specifically pressed on one woman because the vibe was okay. So I asked, what do you mean by too much? And she gave a really, really long gender essentialist, just transphobic language that I had to, yeah, let's move on to the next topic, because I had other things to ask, and I do not want to get into a huge confrontation or even argument between on a specific reason, like when especially when I'm on the recording, and especially I have other questions to ask. But I think I am actually writing a methodological reflection paper on this. I think this is a really, really an aspect that is not addressed enough in the feminist methodology section. Like in feminist methodology, we always think, you should be attentive to the power dynamics between you as a researcher and the subjects and the interviewees as a research subject, as if you have the authority over them. And you have to be attentive to that power dynamic, and you have to be reflexive, and you have to give them to be collaborative and stuff. And I all know that, but I don't think this strand of literature has done enough to tackle with the more nuanced power dynamic in between, that you have to sort of respect, but also how much emotional tool it is asking you to, emotional labor, such respect it is asking you as a researcher to do, especially when you are doing, for example, with right-wing communities, or not right-wing but more conservative communities, as my interlocutors are. I think this is a really good question. Thank you so much for this chance that I can speak this out.
Yeah, I'm so glad you got to talk about this, because that's also, I think, something that a lot of researchers struggle with. And I look forward to reading that piece on the methodology. So one of the chapters is titled "Catching the Moon in the Water," and I know that you're considering to have that 水中撈月 to be the title of your whole manuscript. Can you talk a little bit more about, what is the significance of this metaphor for the陪讀媽媽?
Yes, of course. So, I think the catching the moon in the water is important in the sense of, first of all, it's a reflection, right? And it looks so beautiful that you want to reach out to it. But I think it's like, it is exactly your gesture of reaching out to the water that shatters the reflection, makes it unattainable. And this but when you stop trying and the moon shines again and you want to try again, so this is what I want to anchor my metaphor in. It's the exact gesture that you are trying for the betterment that is shattering your imagination of the betterment. Like for the women who are in Thailand, for example, they before they left China, they will say, I will do everything. If I have to wash the dishes and run, I will wash the dishes and run, right? But when they are arriving Thailand, they have this another layer of desire that emerged. Like they suddenly feel Thailand is not enough anymore. They felt, oh, Thailand is eventually just a Southeast Asia country that economic is not so strong and the education resource is not so well sourced. And it's the exactly gesture that they arrived to Thailand that the imagination of Thailand is shattered. And they want to reach out again. And for the United States, it's more straightforward because of the visa regime. This is a thing that I did not have a chance to talk, but I will briefly mention it. In Thailand, there is a 陪读签证. So there is a陪读visa. So these women can legally obtain a visa that's specifically reserved for accompanying their children to study in Thailand. But in the United States, it's not the case. In the United States, there is not a 陪读签证 for parents. There is F2. I would assume you all know that one visa, F1 international visa, right? F1 international visa can have a dependent, which can be your spouse or your kid, but not vice versa. The kid cannot have if the kid is on F1, then the mother cannot have a F2 visa. So this is the major difference. So for women in the United States, they often have to negotiate to obtain other kinds of visa that guarantee their legal stay in the United States. For example, B visa, or at times the mother will actually obtain the F1 visa. And the kid will obtain the F2 visa, but just for the visa category. So mom is legally the international student who's study abroad. And the kid is just a dependent that is brought to the United States. But they are constantly have to negotiate this bordering practice in their daily life because they are worried, because my visa is not 100%. They're legit. Their stay is legal, but it's not 100%, flawless. So they have this concerns, and this is another way that shatters the reflection of the moon, because they imagine the United States as the place of beautiful dream come true, because 美国 as 美 and 美梦 as 美, beautiful dream and beautiful country. But now they're in the United States, they realize it's not that beautiful anymore. They have to constantly negotiate with the visa regime, with the language, with a lot of other bureaucratic stuff that they did not anticipate. And this is where the reason why I want to use this metaphor, and I think it captures the cruel optimism essence of this education, the transnational education relocation process. Thank you, Sharon, for this question.
多謝大家今日繼續收聽我哋 For Example Podcast，希望大家聽到一個相對上豐富嘅由中國啦去到泰國對美國一個移民啦，同性別啦，同埋族群啦，同埋國族啦，之間唔同嘅拉扯啦。咁我相信大家都會喺呢個一方面啦，我諗同香港人可以拉到唔少共鳴嘅位啦，或者可愛香港人嘅社群拉到唔少共鳴嘅位。但另一方面，都希望俾大家有個更加可能你可以話多層次啦、深少少嘅對可能中國移民嘅理解啦，咁 which 我覺得都係對我哋去思考喺海外政治問題一個非常之重要嘅面向啦。咁點都好啦，非常之多謝大家今日繼續收聽 For Example 嘅 podcast 啦。咁我哋嚟緊應該呢個夏天會可以回復翻一個相對上正常嘅軌道啦。咁所以希望大家繼續收聽同埋支持我哋嘅 podcast。我哋下一集再見，拜拜。